Thank you for listening to this message from Northwest Hills Community Church in Corvallis, Oregon. You can learn more about our church at nwhills.com. Today, lead pastor Josh Carstensen continues a series on the writings of Peter. 2 Peter 2 has often been called a dark corner of the New Testament. Because knowing his time was short, Peter boldly warns us against false prophets and the consequences of denying Christ. And his main concern isn't outside culture, but within the church and our own hearts. This is a call to examine our hearts, question our influences, and rediscover the true power of Christ in our lives. Also, as part of the Something to Say series, we'll start the message with someone's testimony. We hope you find it encouraging. Now, here's that story.
Hi, my name is Melissa Whiteman. I've been attending Northwest Hills for 4.5 years with my husband Luke and our children. My parents adopted me at birth from a birth mother who made it clear that I was a mistake and she did not want me. And although I was raised in a Christian home, I had a wonderful upbringing, I accepted Christ at a young age, I struggled until early adulthood with the pain of my birth mother's rejection of me and her abandonment of me, and I struggled my entire life up until young adulthood with this pain, and I searched for value and wholeness in places where it was not to be found. When I was a young adult, I was drawn by the Lord to do a missions outreach program called Youth with a Mission, also known as YWAM, and it consisted of several weeks of biblical instruction and then several weeks on outreach to a foreign country. And during the time of biblical instruction, I experienced teaching on the Bible that completely changed my life. I was introduced to God in a way that I had never met him before, as the perfect father, the perfect parent, the one who does not reject, abandon, or forsake me, the one who has always loved me, the only one who could love me perfectly, and as the one who my identity, worth, and value come from. I experienced true emotional restoration of my adoption pain during that time of biblical instruction. And then it was time to go on outreach, and my team leader sat me down and told me I had 20 minutes to pray and discern whether I would go to Egypt or to Egypt and South Sudan. And as I prayed, I knew that Jesus was calling me to go to Sudan, and I didn't know why at the time, but it felt like a very significant and weighty decision. And I prayed and I said, Jesus, you have restored me. I owe everything to you. Jesus, I will follow you to the ends of the earth. If you want me to go to Sudan, then I say, yes, Lord, I'm here, send me. And so I went to Sudan, and 8 days after we landed, I was hospitalized with a severe case of malaria. And at the same time, I was co-infected with Lyme disease and multiple other bug-borne illnesses, and I was chronically ill for the next 7 years. And those were a really hard 7 years. During those years of being sick, I got married, and I had my first 2 children, and I had a lot of health issues that I dealt with. I was very weak and lost a lot of my memory and was in pain all the time. All the jobs that I had to quit because I was just too ill, and it was a tough season. I was so distracted by what was going on with me and having kids and becoming a mom that I unfortunately wasn't very active for a few years in my relationship with God. I never prayed and asked him to heal me, and I stopped reading the Bible as much. And it wasn't until a few years into being sick, my mom did a Bible study about Jesus, that I started reading the Bible to keep up with her study, and God drew me back to himself just from me reading the Bible, and I felt like I was getting to know him all over again, and he did a complete work of spiritual restoration in my life that I'm so grateful for, and I've memorized over half the Psalms, and he just blesses me so much by being immersed in his word. 7 years after getting sick, we heard of an alternative treatment for Lyme disease and bug-borne illnesses that was created by a Christian doctor. And I knew that there was a chance that the treatment would not work for me, but the treatment did work, and I was completely healed of, at the time I had 15 chronic infections. And I believe that it was God who worked through the treatment, and allowed me to be completely healed. As I look at my life, I can see how God has restored me in countless ways, both large and small. And I have truly learned that God is a God of restoration. He restores, He sustains, and He revives me and all of us as He walks us through this journey of life. I'm grateful that God, in His kindness, healed me and restored me from my adoption pain and from my health pain. The Bible teaches us that we are to continually remember these times of restoration, these times of revival, the things He has done for us, the things He has saved us from, and the Bible calls them His great and wonderful works. And I emulate with the words of the psalmist in Psalm 71, who says, "O God, you who have shown me great and severe troubles, you shall revive me again."
My name is Josh Carstensen. I'm the lead pastor here. I was gone for the month of July, and so I'm meeting some new people as I'm back. But it's good to be back. Good to be gone. Good to be back. Last week we had a friend of mine, Caleb Hunt. He's a ministry partner. He brought us a great sermon, and he started out his sermon with a question. And he asked the question, have you ever been so confidently wrong about something that you've gotten yourself into a bit of trouble? He gave us a story of when he was in college. This would have been a number of years ago, and he's hanging out with some friends for the first time, learning how to surf, and he's like, okay, I think I can do this. I think I can figure it out. And some of you will remember the story. He took his board, he's in San Diego, and he started sprinting into the water, only to find himself waist deep, stepping on something that like really stung him badly, and he thought, maybe I stepped on a nail. And then he turns back around to go back to shore, and he steps again, and he gets stung by a stingray, like really bad, and has to get rescued, which if you've been there and you can imagine, a beach that's crowded enough that has lifeguards necessitates a lot of people around, and here you are, you're in college, and that's got to be insanely embarrassing. I'm just saying, there's a lot of people around. So I'm hearing this story, and I'm just feeling bad for him. I'm sitting here last week, and I'm feeling a couple thoughts. For one, yeah, just bad. Like, how many of you have run into the ocean 1,000 times and have never been stung by a stingray? Like it happened. Like I cannot tell you how many times I've been into the ocean. But then I was also reminded of a couple of incidences of like, yeah, there actually are legit, real dangers in the ocean. I was thinking about a time of stingrays where I was living in Southern California. I was in Laguna Beach. It was actually probably pretty close to the time that he was down there. And I love being in the water, however I could get in the water. I was in the water, and one day I'm spearfishing, and I swam out. I'm probably, 20, 30 yards out, and I put my mask on, and I'm in like 10 feet of water, and I look down, and it's just pitch black, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stingrays, like the entire floor. I'm thinking like, I got to kill one of these. Like, I have a spear. I'm like, I can kill one. But this was like right around the time that Steve Irwin had just passed away, and he'd been stung in the heart by a stingray. Rest in peace, Croc Hunter. And so I'm like kind of scared. I'm like, what happens if they all attack me? And like, I got to get out of here. So this is like, this very eerie feeling. I'm like, I got to get out of here. And then there was another time. This was just a couple years ago. My family was down in Southern California. Well, we're actually in Santa Cruz. And so I'm there. We're with the Cabanisses. Some of you guys know them. We're staying at a place that's been in Megan's family for years. So it's a beach that she's grown up going to all the time. And we're hanging out at this beach every day, and it's a blast. Like, our kids are playing in the water all day, all afternoon. At this point, we had like a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, like boogie boarding, doing all the things. We're paddle boarding out there on stand-up inflatables, like having a great time. And towards the end of the week, we also started noticing, like, there's no one else there, which is weird. Like, school had been back in, and we're the Oregonians at the beach. It's not that warm, but we're like, we are going to make it happen. But no one else is swimming in the water. Well, towards the end of the week, we're sitting on the beach. We get there in the early afternoon, and we're sitting down, getting ready to go in. And my wife and I, we both sit down, and she's right here. She'll attest to the story to you. We look out into the water, and at the same time, we see something that terrifies both of us. And we both say, did you just see that? And what I saw, I start describing it, I said, like, wow, like very close to shore, I saw what appears to be a great white shark, like eating a seal or like coming out of the water, like right there. And my wife goes, oh, I saw a great white too. I saw the one over there that breached completely out of the water. You know, like you see it on TV on like Shark Week. Like you're talking massive great white completely out of the water. Two different things. Needless to say, we put those floaties on the kids and we said, go to town. Like, have fun. Get out there. And I'm thinking, like, we've been swimming all week here. Like, no one's in the water. Why didn't anyone say anything to us? And so I look it up online. Like that night, we go back to the place, and I'm looking up, like, great white sharks, Aptos, California. Turns out, little well-known fact to the locals, like since 2014, apparently the way that the ocean waters change, like this particular stretch of beach is warm enough that it's like a hangout spot for juvenile great whites. And it's affectionately now labeled Shark Park. So if you Google Shark Park, it is this stretch of beach. And it's so infiltrated with great whites that I kid you not, they have daily shark watching tours, like on boats. Like you would go on a whale watching tour, they have great white shark watching tours. And we saw the boats, like from shore. We saw people out there and we were just like, I wonder what they're doing. Like, I wonder what they're looking for as we're swimming in the water. And yet no one stopped to say, hey, you Oregonians, like maybe don't swim in Shark Park. Why am I telling you this story? Why did Caleb start his message with a similar story? Sometimes we are in danger and we don't even know it. Right? I'm swimming. I don't know that there's stingrays down there. Caleb didn't know. For multiple days, we're just hanging out in Shark Park, having absolutely no idea, and no one said anything. Well, today we're going to open up a letter that we've been looking at, really the story in the life of Peter for a while, and this is his last letter that he writes, and he's writing today really to give a giant warning. This is one of those chapters in the Bible it's a dark chapter. It's kind of like, imagine this chapter is kind of a picture of a great white, like at the beach saying, don't swim, be careful. Right? And for you real animal lovers, I know great whites don't want to eat people, but they do and they can. So they're terrifying. Sorry. But this chapter is just one of those unique chapters in the Bible. People call it this. They call this chapter, they call Matthew 23 and the book of Jude the dark corners of the New Testament. And so if you're like new to church, like this is going to be a really intense Sunday, and so I'm sorry, welcome. It's not normally like this, but this is just a message where Peter, he's about to die. He's in prison. He's in his late 60s at this point, and he knows, like, I'm going to be killed for my faith, and I know that the church is in danger, and I have to say something because I'm not going to be around very long, and they need to hear what I have to say. And so what he says is it's fairly aggressive. It's insanely aggressive, let's be honest. But it's really important. And so we're going to zoom in on this chapter on the predator. Right? We're going to zoom in on the thing that will kill you. And it's something inside the church. And so I'm going to do my best to really give it the weight that it deserves while just being honest about the text and being honest about ourselves. And so if you got a Bible, it's in 2 Peter chapter 2. There's church Bibles in seats in front of you. If you need a church Bible, it's on page 1018, I believe. We'll also have the text up here. So as we're going there, here's what we're going to do. I want us to look at this, and I want us to recognize a couple things. First of all, if you're looking at your Bible right now and you're looking at that chapter, it breaks down into 3 different sections. The first section in verses 1 through 3 are really a summary of the entire chapter. So if you don't want to have to study the whole chapter this week, just really focus in on 1 through 3. It's his whole argument right there. And he's basically going to say, hey, to the church, be careful. In the past and in the future, false teachers will rise up inside the church, and you got to be careful of what raises up inside the church. So we're going to talk about that today. False teaching. We're going to talk about false beliefs within the church. So that's going to there's a real danger and a threat for that. So that's verses 1 through 3. In verses 4 through the first part of verse 10, he's going to say, and God's going to do something about these false teachers. Because the proclivity for you and I is to think that if people are getting away with it, that God's not doing anything. And Peter's going to go, oh, no, God will do something. He has done something, and he gives us 3 different historical examples of where God does something when people don't get faith right, who claim that they're getting it right. And then the last section, which is kind of the second part of verse 10, if you see that all the way to verse 22, it's just this very aggressive, angry call out to these false teachers. It's kind of this like just blasting, this chastisement of like, who in the world do you think you are? You are wrecking the church. You are causing all kinds of problems. Be very careful because God's got something special for you. That's kind of what Peter's getting after there. So we're going to start it out in verses 1 through 3. So if you're able, would you stand with me? We're going to read 1 through 3. This is his summary. And then I kind of just hope to walk through it. And at the end of the day, ask ourselves, like, where am I prone to not just believe false teaching, but where am I prone to be a false teacher? The word should be up there. When I'm done with verse 3, I'm going to say, this is the word of the Lord, and you can say, thanks be to God. But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you. Notice this is future tense. He's saying, hey, it may not be here right now, but it's going to happen. I'm going to die. When I leave, this is going to happen in the church. Who will secretly bring in destructive heresies. All right, so it's not going to be obvious at first. It's going to be hidden. It's going to be discreet. Even denying the master, that's Jesus, who bought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their sensuality. So now he gives the markers of what these false teachers will look like. And we're going to talk about this. Many will follow their sensuality, and because of them, the way of truth will be blasphemed. And in their greed, they will exploit you with false words. Their condemnation from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You can grab a seat here. Let me try to give you just a little bit of a summary of Peter's heart here. This goes back to chapter 1, where he's beginning this argument in chapter 1 that Jesus is in fact God. And there's a group of people who are coming into the church who are saying that Jesus is not God, right? That's that little phrase there. I think it's in verse 1, denying the master who bought them. There's a group of people who are saying, hey, you're Jesus. I may like him. He may be helpful for moral teaching. He may be some like spiritual guide, but he's not actually God. And Peter is just enraged at people saying this. And of all people, he should be the person being enraged to say this. Right? Because if the Bible's true and we believe it's true, if what we read about Peter is true and we believe it to be true, he is the voice of authority when it comes to someone saying, yeah, Jesus actually is God, because I witnessed his whole life, his death, and his resurrection. So if anyone's to say that Jesus is in fact God, if Jesus is who he says he is, Peter's a pretty good person to be able to do that. And so Peter, he's vehemently upset with all these people who are making these claims. And he goes, you don't have any idea. You weren't there. I was there. Right? Jesus changed my life. Like, I walked on water. You're going to tell me that guy's not God who let me walk on water? Good luck changing my mind. Right? I saw him beat to a bloody pulp. I saw him nailed to a cross. And I saw his post-resurrected life 3 days later. You're not going to convince me. Right? So this is like angry, like, do not say that what I'm saying is wrong. Right? And you know that feeling. I'm just going to speak to my guys for just a minute. And it's probably true with ladies too. But guys, there's fewer things more infuriating when someone calls you out on something that's absolutely not true. And you're just like, no way, do not test my integrity. Do not say what I'm saying is wrong when you know that it's right. Right? That just digs at most guys, and probably to girls too. And Peter's saying, no. But then he backs it up. And he backs it up at the end of chapter 1. He says, hey, okay, if you don't want to take my life for it, whatever. Like that's on you. Like you're not going to get a better eyewitness. You will not get a better proof that Jesus is God than my life and my story. But okay, you don't want to believe me? Whatever. Right? And then he says this in verse 19. In verse 19 of chapter 1, he says this: if you don't want to believe my word, at least believe the Bible, basically, the Old Testament. He says this in 19. And we have something sure, the prophetic word to which you will do well to pay attention to. What is he saying? He's saying, hey, if you don't want to believe my story, whatever. Like, okay, you don't believe my story. How about the thousands of years of history where everyone's saying the same thing and it's all coming true in Jesus? Like, if you're not going to believe in that, like, good luck. Do whatever you want. But so he makes his claim here that Jesus is in fact God. The entire story of the Old Testament corroborates this idea. And so Peter's saying, no. If you come into this church and you call yourself a Christian, and now you're saying that Jesus isn't God, you will destroy the church, and guess what? God will destroy you. And he gets aggressive with these people. God will destroy you. And here's the problem. A lot of times when we disobey God, right, when we're living life apart from him, most of the time, let's be honest, most of the time it doesn't really feel like God cares. Cares is the wrong word. It doesn't really feel like we're going to be punished for it. Maybe it feels like God's not paying attention. It feels like maybe we can get away with whatever we want, right? I can kind of just live whatever life I want to live, and maybe God's paying attention, maybe not. But historically, like, the bent in the human heart is to believe that I can kind of just live my life however I want, and like God's not really paying that much attention to me. But what Peter's saying is like, oh, no, God's paying attention. Do not mistake his lack of activity with his indifference. Right? So if God is not actively kind of stopping you from doing what you're doing, it's not because he doesn't care, it's because he's wildly patient. And then here's Peter. He's going to bring in 3 different examples in history from the Old Testament of where God steps in and just wildly whacks people upside the head and is going, no, I'm paying attention. As a warning, and he makes it very clear, the reason I'm telling you this is a warning to get it right. And so he gives us 3 examples. We see this, nope, I'm skipping ahead. He gives us 3 examples, but first he just straight up, we are going to first talk about Peter's just frustration with these teachers. As we get into this frustration, though, I got to say this. Peter's talking to the church. It's really important. He's not just talking to culture. He's not just upset at all the lies that are out there in the cultural moment of the day. And there's a lot of them, right? And we can get upset about them. Like, and we should, right? We should get upset that, man, schools teach this, or this is being promulgated in different movies, and those things should bother us, but far more than what's out there in culture, like, we need to be concerned with what's happening in here, right? Like, we need to be concerned what's happening in our churches. And so Peter's going to do a really good job at saying, hey, pay attention to your life before you get upset with what's going on out there. And he gives us really kind of a clear description of these people who are destroying the church. And you can follow along. I'm going to read a chunk here. I'm going to read the second half of verse 10 all the way down to 22, just seeing like frustrated, angry Peter at people who are destroying the church. He calls them bold and willful. They do not tremble as they blaspheme the glorious one. Whereas angels, though greater in might and power, they don't pronounce a blasphemous judgment against them before the Lord. But these, right, this is people who are speaking things that are not true about God, like irrational animals, creatures of instinct, born to be caught and destroyed, blaspheming about matters of which they are ignorant, will also be destroyed in their destruction, suffering wrong as they wage for their wrongdoing. They count it pleasure to revel in the daytime. Basically, we can live however we want. They are blots and blemishes, reveling in their deceptions while they feast with you. They have eyes full of adultery, insatiable for sin. They entice unsteady souls. They have hearts trained in greed, accursed children. Right? This is like, Peter is very straight here. Forsaking the right way, they have gone astray. They have followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved gain from wrongdoing. Peter's making a correlation here to an Old Testament prophet who aligned Israel with cult prostitution, and he's saying, no, God's going to do something serious about this. Right, verse 16, but was rebuked for his own transgression. A speechless donkey spoke with a human voice and restrained the prophet's madness. He continues. You're welcome for this nice, uplifting message. 17, they are waterless springs and mist driven by a storm. For them, the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved. For speaking loud boasts of folly, they entice by sensual passions the flesh of those who are barely escaping from those who live in error. Man, look at verse 19. Just hold on to this verse this week. This is the lie of the world and the lie of the church when we neglect the real gospel. They promise them freedom, but they themselves are slaves of corruption. For whatever overcomes a person, to that he is enslaved. For if, after they have escaped the defilements of the world through the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled in them and overcome, the last state has become worse for them than the first. For it would have been better for them never to have known the way of righteousness than after knowing it, turn back from the holy commandment delivered to them. What the true proverb says has happened to them. The dog returns to its own vomit, and the sow, after washing herself, returns to wallow in the mire. Here's Peter saying, how much damage happens when someone says they're a follower of Jesus, comes into the church, speaks ill of who God is, and just watch the repercussion. And I'll tell you what, I don't know statistically if this is true, but in my experience it is. Most of the time, when people that I know and love have kind of walked away from the church, most of the time it's come from influence of people inside the church, of people who say that they're followers of Jesus. You know, it'll come from people saying things like, well, you know, you kind of grew up with this belief, but that's not really true. We can live however we want. Or, you know, you grew up in this, but no, it's more like this. And he's railing against this. And again, it feels harsh. But if someone was attacking your family, like, you'd be harsh too. Right? If someone was coming in and trying to destroy my family, like if I'm at home, like my wife and I are on the bottom floor, my kids sleep up top, if someone's coming into my house to harm my children, like there's one of two options. It's rifle or bow and arrow. And we're going to decide in that moment. Right? Like, I'm going to defend my castle. I'm going to defend my children. And here's Peter. He's saying, like, I'm going to defend this. This is very serious. And again, God is going to defend it too. In verses 4 through 10, we get 3 examples of where God does stop people from causing harm to the church. We're going to look at them briefly. I have no time to get into each of the stories because they're each a huge story in and of themselves, but Peter just mentions them. Starting in verse 4. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. There's a really strange story in Genesis chapter 6, where you have a group of angels who are perverting what God's desire for them was, and God cast them into what's called hell, into a place of basically containment until the day of judgment. And Peter's saying, oh, if God did that to them, I promise you, he's paying attention to what you're doing. He continues on and he gives a second example in verse 5. He says, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. Right? Remember that great kid's story of the great ark and the nice rainbow and God killing everyone on the face of the earth? Like, this is Peter saying, oh yeah, just wait. Like, God's going to do something here. If you're going to come into his church and you're going to be a false teacher, like, be careful, because God's coming after you. And then the last example, it's another story that some of you will know, and this is in verse 6. If by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, and then he makes it real clear why he's giving all 3 of these, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. All right, this is a city that's relishing in sexual abuse. This is a story that's really uncomfortable to read. You read it and you're just like, that is disgusting all the way through its core. And God says, I will have none of that. And he levels the city. And so here's Peter saying, with the same heart and the same passion, no, like, don't mess up God's church. Like, don't get it wrong. Like, I have the purity of the church is so important. We got to get this right. God's paying attention. I mean, in all three of these, Peter's going to say, hey, the church, guys, we got to pay attention to ourselves. And we got to know what's right, and we got to know what's true. And we listen to a lot of voices inside the church, right? What do I mean by that? Right? Whether it's Sunday morning, you're hearing someone. Like right now, I'm telling you, this is what the Bible says. But you're also hearing that a lot of different places. Right? We're hearing this in books that we read. We're hearing this in podcasts. We're hearing this in other sermons or Christian different authors. There's a lot of places where we would hear things, and we want to be people who really understand, is this from the Bible? Is this real? Or is this just someone's idea that's out there? Right? We got to know if it's actually true, and we got to care about what's happening in the church first, again, rather than caring what's happening out there in the world. I think sometimes we can get far too worked up about what's happening in the world and not too concerned about what's happening here first. And we got to get it, we have to worry about what's happening here. A while back, I was having breakfast with a friend, and he was just expressing all the frustration of like the world right now, right? Like, man, I can't believe my kids are learning this in school. It's so frustrating, kind of just, and I get it. Like, yeah, I get that story. And he was frustrated with some things of like different people, different coworkers, man, all this and this. And it was like a whole breakfast of I'm frustrated with all these things out there. And then a couple days later, like I find out that the guy's in the middle of an affair. And I'm like, how can you be so upset with all these things that are happening in the world when like your own house is a wreck? And I think that's a good reminder for the church. Like, yes, we should care about the world that we live in. Yes, like we should care because we're in it too. But we got to care about this first. Like I got to care about my life first before I care about other people's life. Peter's making that clear. So he's going to give us two examples here of what these false teachers are marked by. And historically, they've been marked by the same things. And there's a much broader list, right? But he gives two examples. He talks about sensuality, and he talks about greedy false words. And we're going to talk about each of these. Now, in both of these circumstances, in this letter to the church that he's writing to, so he's writing to a group of churches in Turkey, there wasn't necessarily like a single event that we can point to and we can go, this happened in this church, therefore this. Like, we don't know. Maybe something happened, maybe it didn't, but more broadly, he's just saying this has happened in the past, and it's gonna happen in the future. Okay, and so he looks at two different things, greedy false words and sensuality. Now, it's interesting. You look at some of the biggest debates in the church today. Let's just start with sensuality within the church, right? A broken sexual ethic, right? A worldview that distorts God's desire for Christian relationship, right? Which is what? One biological male, one biological female, united in marriage, committed together forever, right? Like that's God's heart for his church. It's always been his heart. And we bend that and we break it, and sometimes in the bending and breaking, we wave flags and celebrate it. Right? And so, if we are a church who does that, let me just say this with compassion and boldness. If you are a church who waves a flag bending God's design, that's the easiest flag that just says false prophet. Right? Be careful. False teaching. Because that's not what God's heart is. But it goes far more than that. Right? It's not just flags. It's not just general ideas. We gotta be way more like in tune with how you and I have tendencies to bend God's design. Right? So this goes from actions, right, in the physical world to the digital world. Right? And this is where the church is really good at hiding things. You're like, well, if it's just digital, it doesn't really matter. So I can kind of do whatever I want in the digital world. I can live out all of my real world fantasies in the digital world, bend God's design for how he's created us to live, and then think that I can get away with it and think that it's not that big of a deal. Yet, man, the digital world will destroy you. Right? I saw a stat this last week. I wasn't even looking for it. Someone sent it to me in the mail. That 56% of divorces right now will talk about online activity as a major reason why this marriage is falling apart. right? And so, man, I would just ask us, be careful of where we are letting our minds and our hearts wander, right? Where we're letting our eyes wander. Like it's been broken this way. That bent has been there since the beginning of time, and it will continue to be there. And there is a attractive allure of deception and like, I can get away with this, that Peter's going to say, no, you can't. Like it will destroy your family. It will destroy generations of your family. It will destroy your relationship with God. It will destroy trust in your partners. No, don't do it. Right? And this is the mind too. It's not just the eyes, it's the mind. It's the mind that goes like, I wonder what this relationship might be like. Right? I wonder what would happen if this were true. Right? Because out of the mind, right, the life is lived. Proverbs says this, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. Guard your heart, for everything you do flows from your heart. So like, we got to guard our hearts from all the wanderings that may be out there. Right, so Peter's going to say, hey, in the church, be very careful. God's given us this incredible gift. Use it as I've given it to you. Do not bend this or break this, because if you do, it will tear apart a church. It will tear apart a family. It will tear apart your life. So for us, I would just say, man, the invitation is for this to be a place of honesty and for a place to get help if that's a struggle of yours. Right? Come clean, be real. There's people who want to help you in this. This is not a place of condemnation. It's a place of restoration. Right? So I'm not going to, we want to be a place of freedom. And the lie that we saw is that you think that hiding it is freedom. You're enslaved. Free yourself. The second one, and we're going to kind of land it on this, and it's so beautiful because it captures the whole gospel here, is he says, greedy false words will destroy a church. Now, what does he mean by that? Greedy false words. So in the early church, you had pastors that oversaw local congregations, but you also had kind of traveling preachers. Your traveling preachers would come from different places, and they'd go around from church to church to church, and the larger the church, the larger the offering, apparently. And so you would have a lot of people who would have this like false incentive to like, I'm just going to say what these people want to hear so that I can get a bigger offering, so that I can just live however I want to live. And oftentimes, apparently from what I've read, sometimes these people didn't even believe it. They're out there just saying words just simply to get this benefit. And so I would say the warning for us is be careful not to use people for personal gain. Right now, what does this look like? Using people for personal gain can mean something like, well, I'm hanging out with this person because I want something from them. And we can want different things from different people, right? We can want status from hanging out with some people. We can want a felt need, which feels weird to even say. Like maybe we feel lonely and it's like, hey, Josh, like another Josh, can we hang out? Not because I want to hang out with you, but because I'm lonely, right? That's like a weird twist on using people. Right? Or, hey, I'd like to help you. Like, Jonathan, can I come over and help you build a fence today? Because I want to feel good that I can help you out today. I'm sure you'd say yes to let me help you out. But if we're not careful, like we can look at friendships or we can look at opportunities with other people to be close to them simply to get something from them. And that right there is the antithesis of what Christianity is. Because what is Christianity? Christianity is God giving his enemies something that we could never pay back. All right? Listen to these words in Luke chapter 6. These are Jesus' words. They're so good, they're so hard, and they're so true. He says this, he says, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? That's a wild verse. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? Now, I'm not railing on having good friends. Don't get me wrong. But if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. Listen to this, though. Verse 35 of Luke 6. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. And listen to this, he's speaking about God, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. When you think about a church that does a lot of harm, is a church that uses people for stuff, right? A church that's filled with people who want relationships just to get in it for what they can get out of it. And Jesus, in the heart of who Jesus is Jesus is a giver to people who have nothing to give back to him. That's what Christianity is. It's like God says, while you were my enemy, I died on that cross because I love you. Not because you're going to give something back, but because I love you. And a healthy, God-loving church is not a church filled with what's in it for me. It's filled with a church that lives like Jesus, right? That's why we say we want to love Jesus and we want to live like him, meaning we want to see people the way that Jesus sees people. That means, hey, I'm going to see you just the way you are, and I'm going to love you not because of what I'm going to get out of it, but because I'm loved, and I'm going to love you like Jesus does. So as we wrap it up, what can we do about this today? Right? First of all, we want to be asking the question: am I listening to false teachers? Because sometimes they're alluring. Like the messages that are out there, they're attractive, but are they real? Right? Those attractive messages will be there forever. And Peter's here saying, no, you got to hold on to what's real. That Jesus really is God, that you got to hold on to his words. Am I believing what's real? And then second, where am I prone to be a false teacher? Right? We all have these tendencies. I could never in my right mind stand up here and say, I am 100% pure in all of my motives and anything that I've ever done. Like, that would be a fool's lie. Right? I got to be the first to say, like, this is a daily thing for me to be reminded myself of. Okay, Jesus, love people the way that you do. Love people the way that you love me. Right? This is a reminder for us. So this week, where do you need to love people like Jesus does? Right? Where's the person that maybe they're just annoying as all get up, right? They're in your office space, and you're just like, I don't want to love you. Like, please go home. How can you love them like Jesus? And then lastly, I'll end on this. Do you know the true teacher? Right? Because at the end of the day, if there's such a thing as a false teacher, then there has to be a standard and a good teacher. Right? If there's lies out there, the only reason that something's a lie is if there's an absolute truth. And the absolute truth is that Jesus Christ is God, that he died on the cross for our sins, that he loves you unbelievably, unconditionally, not because of anything that we have done or might possibly will do, but because that's who he is. He's a God who loves like that. Do you know that love? If not, I'm going to just pray a little bit, and I'm going to give you an invitation to get to know him. The rest of us, let's just pray together. Father, I thank you that we can get this just a bold, honest, clear word from you. I thank you for Peter, a man whose life was radically changed and who's willing to just call a spade and say, hey, I'm about to die, and I'm going to leave earth. And when I leave, man, the temptation from within the Christian community is going to be self-seeking, self-centered, broken sensuality, and it's going to destroy things. So be wise, be careful. God, for those of us this morning who we're just not sure about this whole Christian thing, I pray that we would just be honest before you and say, God, I would love to know you. I'm not even sure that you exist, but God, if you do, would you show yourself to me today? And God, I recognize that, hey, I need something that I don't have. Or maybe we don't even recognize it. Well, hear the preacher say, we're all sinners, right? Meaning we have all lived how we ought not to. Everyone knows that. And God is a God of justice, which means that someday he's going to make us pay for that. And that's good and right, and we all feel that way about the world we live in. We want all wrongs to be made right. And the only way for that punishment not to be on me is for it to go on someone else. And Jesus, you went to that cross, and you gave your life in place of mine. And so I just need to say, God, thank you for your life in place of mine. And I want to try to figure out how to follow you. But God, today I need you. God, thank you for your word. Thank you that it is true. And thank you for your patience. And let us not mistake your patience for your absence. We love you, Jesus. Amen. Love you guys.
Thanks for listening to today's teaching from Northwest Hills Community Church. We hope you find ways to apply the gospel to your life. And be sure to check out our website, nwhills.com, where you'll find ways to engage with us. And if you're able, we'd love to see you at church next Sunday. Thanks again for listening.